The healing of narcissism doesn't come through humiliation, but through transformation. Where the false self, I'm sure you've heard of that before, we're going to be talking a lot more about it, but the false self collapses safely under grace. And the true self, the real person on the inside, that person we're supposed to be, emerges in the security of being seen, known, and loved. Our subject today is part 1 of Unmasking the Power and Control System of Narcissism. I'm glad you're with us, and I'm hoping you'll get a little something out of this today. It was interesting to write, interesting to put together, and there's so much more to talk about regarding it. My name is Dr. Pierre Samaan, and this is part 1 of Unmasking the Power and Control System of Narcissism, a deeper journey into understanding how power becomes pathology and how truth restores the soul. If you're noticing, I just had a visit with the doctor and had some laser treatments. So it's not Ash Wednesday today, but it kind of looks like it, doesn't it? And so he took off some skin and did a great job. I have a wonderful doctor, and I especially like it when he numbs with the needle, because he does it in a special way that you don't even feel the needle. So I hope you have a good doctor as well when you have these things happening to you. This has been quite a year. We're coming back. It's been weeks since we've had our last recording. The computer went down. I was out for weeks with the computer. And when you know it, as soon as the computer gets everything together, we put everything together on the computer, the phone goes out. And then I was out dealing with that for quite a while. And now we're back again, getting back into that routine, and thank you for being patient. Before we get further into this subject, let me take a moment, or especially allow me to take a moment to begin sharing a brief introduction on my first book, Unmasking Addiction. The Unmasking Narcissism book hopefully will be published before the end of this year, and Unmasking Addiction is my first book. This work advances a truly holistic model of recovery, one that refuses to reduce addiction to a single dimension. Rather than addressing only behavior or symptom management, Unmasking Addiction presents a comprehensive pathway toward lasting freedom by engaging the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. The heart of the Unmasking Addictions book is grounded in conviction that sustainable recovery requires integration. Emotional wounds must be understood and healed. Cognitive distortions must be identified and corrected. The body must be restored and strengthened. And the spirit must be renewed and anchored in truth. And so many treatment programs, they eliminate that spirit part. And we have to deal with all three parts in order for complete or total healing and sustained healing. Addiction is never merely a chemical dependency. It's often intertwined with trauma, shame, false beliefs, and relational factors as well. It's spiritual disconnection. Therefore, recovery must be equally comprehensive. Unmasking Addictions guides readers through a balanced and restorative process that integrates spiritual formation, emotional healing, and physical well-being. It equips individuals with practical strategies, clinical insight, and biblically grounded wisdom designed to support long-term sobriety, not simply abstinence, but transformation. The goal is not only to remove the addictive behavior, but to rebuild identity, restore dignity, and cultivate resilience. To learn more about the book, please visit unmaskingaddiction.org or purchase your copy at Amazon or WestBow Press, the publisher. Well, getting back to the subject, Unmasking the Power and Control System of Narcissism, Part 1, I think we have to answer the question, what is a control system? I'm not an engineer, so I had to look up that and think, what is a control system? And What has that got to do with narcissism? Well, you'll see as we talk about this. A control system is a system that monitors outputs, compares them to desired goal or whatever the reference is, adjusts inputs to minimize deviation from that goal. Now that's an engineering definition, and there's other engineering definitions, so I hope you understood that, because for me, that kind of goes a little bit over my head. At its core, however, every control system answers three questions. It just break it down into something simple. It answers three questions. What is the goal? Well, that's the desired state, the reference value. What is actually happening? That's the measured output. And what adjustment is needed? That's the correction, the corrective action that's taken. If we pause for a moment and look beyond mechanics, we begin to see something profound. A control system is not merely a technological construct. It's not just an engineering idiom. It's a framework for stability. It measures, it compares, it corrects, and recalibrates in order to reduce deviation from the desired state. Its function isn't domination, it's alignment. Now we begin to see where this is going. Its purpose is not tyranny, it's regulation. In healthy systems, feedback is welcomed because feedback preserves order. Correction is not humiliation, it's refinement. But what happens when the system itself becomes distorted? What happens when the reference value or goal shifts from truth to ego? What happens when the measurement of reality is filtered through insecurity? What happens when the corrective action is no longer about restoring balance, but about preserving image? In human personality, especially within narcissistic pathology, we witness a tragic inversion of the control model. The goal is no longer relational harmony or truth. The goal becomes admiration. The measured output is no longer objective feedback. It's perceived as a threat or an affirmation. And the corrective action, it becomes manipulation, intimidation, rewriting the narratives, and silencing dissent. Kind of sounds political there, doesn't it? In engineering, a stable control system tolerates feedback. In narcissism, feedback feels like annihilation. And here we arrive at the transition. When regulation becomes rigidity, when feedback is a threat, and when control is no longer a tool but a lifeline, we move from systems theory into soul theory. We move from mechanics into identity. Because for the narcissist, control is not simply behavior, it's survival. And that leads us directly into our next exploration. The narcissist's illusion of strength. When control becomes identity, the illusion of strength and the fear beneath it. Power itself isn't evil. Sometimes we need powerful people, or we need to become powerful ourselves. There's nothing evil about that. The Bible affirms authority when exercised with humility. Read that for yourself in Mark chapter 10, verses 42 to 45. See what you think. The problem isn't power, but power divorced from love. Today we explore how within narcissistic pathology, power becomes armor, control becomes oxygen, and domination becomes identity. This isn't about villainizing individuals. It's about exposing mechanics, exposing the mechanisms so we can discern truth, protect the vulnerable, and pursue healing. when control becomes identity, then there's going to be problems. Narcissistic power isn't true strength. It's a defensive architecture built to protect a fragile core from many things, but basically the big thing is shame. The big thing is exposure. And I guess we could add psychological collapse, that fear of annihilation, because that's the way they feel in being exposed as who they really are on the inside, or who they believe they really are on the inside. Perhaps worse than they really are. They believe they're that way. Domination feels like survival to them, but it's counterfeit safety. And there's 3 pillars when we look at narcissistic control. Fragile core beneath the grandiose surface is the first pillar. And then power as a defense against shame. And the third pillar is mechanics of control. Domination as survival. Domination in whatever ways they dominate. Narcissistic power must be understood in layers. Psychological foundation in the narcissist, that's fragility, brittleness, insecurity. And then there's that emotional driver, which is shame. Now, they'll never tell you that, but that's what the emotional driver is. Behavioral expression, well, that's the control patterns. We move from the inner wound to the outward behavior. So that fragile core beneath the surface, it's not about too much self-esteem, but unstable self-esteem. And that unstable self-esteem leads to the grandiosity, the entitlement, the need for admiration, and the lack of empathy. They can't put themselves in your shoes, in other words. But research shows pathological narcissism is dysregulated. And when we say dysregulated, it basically unrestrained. It oscillates, and it's not, I want to say not in control, yet it is in control to that grandiosity, to what they want it to be. But it bounces so quick and easy the minute there's a threat, a perceived threat, not an actual threat, a perceived threat. The actual threat is in itself, but they'll perceive a threat where there is no threat. And that causes self-worth to dive, and they can't have that. It's essential to note that narcissism isn't excessive confidence. It's unstable self-esteem, oscillating between inflation and collapse. And there's a price for domination and shame. Hunger for domination is defensive. Narcissism is a defensive organization protecting against shame and identity diffusion. Narcissism reflects unmet mirroring needs. The grandiose exterior is intended to reflect back a need for a payment. What are you going to give me? What am I going to get out of this? A demand for what's owed to them. So I guess we have to answer the question, what is mirroring? Yeah? What are mirroring needs? Well, mirroring refers to the child's need to have his or her inner world that comprises feelings. Their kids are big on feelings. We were all big on feelings, feeling good when we were kids. And if we didn't feel good, we didn't even know why, but we just didn't feel good. And we would cry, or we would yell, or we would stomp, or we would do something, and we didn't even know why, but we were doing it. And parents didn't know why either, and they try to figure it out. So feelings, achievements, that's an important mirroring need for kids. Struggles, uniqueness, recognized, reflected, and validated by caregivers. All those things are important. When you look at your child and you smile, What do they do? You look at them with an angry face. What do they do? Ooh, it's not pleasant. You're not mirroring what they need. When a child says, look at me, and the parent responds warmly, I see you. You did that beautifully. It's probably something my wife would have said. That's mirroring. 3 core experiences of mirroring. I think we need to look at that and think, if I mirrored properly to my children, then they're going to have a better chance of feeling seen, of feeling like they matter, and feeling like their feelings and efforts have value. Did that happen to you when you were a kid? Did your parents mirror that to you? Did that come out in your life? Over time, the external affirmation becomes internalized as stable self-worth. The child no longer needs constant applause because he or she has absorbed the mirror into his or her identity. But when they're experiencing something else in that mirror, what happens? When mirroring needs are chronically unmet, distorted, or inconsistent, the child experiences a fracture in self-development. And unfortunately, that's what happens to so many narcissists. Unmet mirroring may occur when caregivers are emotionally unavailable, are critical or dismissive, are narcissists themselves, praise only performance but not personhood, provide inconsistent validation, shame vulnerability. You should be ashamed of yourself. And compare the child to others. Why aren't you like your brother or your sister or your friends? Instead of internalizing healthy self-worth, the child internalizes a deficit, the false self that helped survive childhood, now in adulthood requires power and control to keep the genuine self hidden. I must prove myself to be seen. If I'm not impressive, I'm nothing. I'm invisible unless I perform. This creates a fragile self that requires ongoing external regulation. In other words, ongoing control of my environment, total control. And there's a compensation that comes out of that for the narcissist. When mirroring needs are unmet, the child doesn't develop stable internal validation. Now, I continue to refer back to the child because it starts with childhood, but also if you pay attention, when you know a narcissist and you pay attention, emotionally, they're children. Emotionally, they haven't flourished. They're stuck back there. They may be brilliant people. They may be wonderful at things that they do, or highly intelligent in many ways. However, emotionally, which has a lot to do with relationship, they're stunted. They're like a child. So the child doesn't develop stable internal validation. The self remains fragile and hungry. Grandiosity becomes a psychological survival mechanism. Not a bad thing to stand out, but the narcissist runs with it by utilizing it as it's an instrument of power and control. Narcissism is a compensation for the mirror that was missing. Narcissism is not excessive self-love. It's a desperate attempt at compensation for an underdeveloped self. Narcissistic traits function in different ways. The inner deficit, I don't feel seen. The narcissistic defense to that, look how superior I am. The inner deficit, I feel small. The narcissistic defense, I'm exceptional. The inner deficit, I fear insignificance. The narcissistic defense, I demand admiration. Or that inner deficit may be, I cannot tolerate shame. The narcissistic defense to that, I blame others. You can often tell, maybe not all the time, most of the time perhaps, when someone is projecting themselves onto you or constantly blaming, there's a compensation going on there. And that inner self is being exposed by throwing it out at others. And it's wonderful to watch, because when you know what you're looking at and you realize it, you see what's going on behind the scenes. You see that on TV quite a bit. You watch politics. I mean, that's just so visible in politics. When they start blaming, suddenly you realize, oh, they're saying the very things they were doing and blaming the other for it. So now you know what they're up to. Now you know what they've been doing. They're projecting themselves onto the other. And they don't even realize it, because it's an automatic thing. It's an automatic narcissistic defense that just illuminates when you know what to look for. It's like the light clicks on and you go, there's the truth. Narcissism becomes a substitute mirror. The individual seeks constant admiration, applause, control, or superiority, not because he or she feels secure, but because he or she cannot sustain self-worth internally. Grandiosity is fragility. There's two sides of the same wound. Clinically, narcissism oscillates between grandiose inflation or shame-based collapse. Back and forth, back and forth. The grandiose self is an inflated structure designed to prevent exposure of the wounded, unmirrored child within. Chronic emotional invalidation is strongly associated with later narcissistic traits, particularly vulnerable narcissism. We spoke about vulnerable narcissism previously, so I encourage you to look that up and learn some more about it if you haven't heard of that one before. But you know what? They're scared. They're afraid. And in adolescence, we all go through that because we're wanting to identify and we're wanting to compare ourselves with others, with our peers. We're wanting to know we're okay, we're equal to, or even better than, or we can get better. And so there's that constant struggle back and forth of oscillation of grandiosity and shame and but that's normal. That's part of the process of maturing. And so most of us are narcissists in adolescence. We grow out of it, however. And as we grow out of it, we are maturing and balancing. Some get stuck in it, and they just aren't growing. They're empowering themselves to give the illusion that they're either normal or better than you, better than normal. The narcissistic individual often cannot tolerate criticism, being ignored, not being admired, loss of status, being wrong, because these experiences reawaken the original wound of not being seen. And come on, all of us, when we were kids, that bothered us. If our parents weren't seeing us, if we weren't getting that proper attention. So it's normal as we go through adolescence. We'll see that. We'll see that in our teenagers as they're growing up. We'll see some of these narcissistic traits. That doesn't mean they're going to become a narcissist. It just means they're developing and they're going to grow through that and out of that, hopefully, most of them do, and become wonderful adults. if they've received the love that you have to give them. The false self versus the true self is an authentic emotional need, and these authentic emotional needs are not mirrored. The child constructs a performative identity to secure approval when they're not mirrored. The false self says, I'll become what earns applause. The true self says, I'm loved for who I am. Narcissism reflects a self that was never securely mirrored enough to relax into authenticity. And what happens when all that occurs, when that authenticity and they didn't mature and the fear grows, the shame grows, the apprehension of not looking equal to or normal. Annihilation anxiety is what psychology would call it, when criticism feels like death. For the narcissistic personality, criticism is not feedback. It equals exposure. It equals humiliation. It equals a psychological threat. Control becomes their oxygen. Annihilation anxiety is the fear that the self will collapse under exposure. For such individuals, relational unpredictability feels dangerous. Losing admiration feels destabilizing. Control is not preference. It feels like survival. And there are biblical parallels to this. So we need to take a look at a couple of the biblical parallels. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it states that humanity is made in the image of God. Well, what does that imply? Identity is conferred, not earned. Worth is bestowed, not achieved. Mirroring is not merely psychological. It reflects a theological design principle. When Jesus was baptized, the Father's affirmation of Christ at his baptism in Matthew chapter 3, verse 17, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Everybody heard it. And notice something about that short little statement. Jesus had not yet performed miracles. He had not yet preached sermons. He had not yet died on the cross. Yet he received the affirmation from the Father. Affirmation preceded performance. Healthy mirroring reflects this divine model. I delight in you before you achieve. When children grow up without this form of affirmation, they may seek it in distorted ways, through dominance, control, sexuality, materialism, success, religious performance, or intellectual superiority. Narcissism is the tragedy of an unaffirmed identity. The narcissistic personality becomes a distorted attempt to answer spiritual and emotional questions. Do I matter? Am I lovable? Am I safe to be known? Narcissism isn't merely sin expressed as pride. It's often the tragedy of a self that was never safely affirmed and therefore never matured. The narcissistic solution is false. If I'm admired, I exist. But the gospel offers a deeper truth. You're known, you're loved, and you're seen in Christ. In Psalm 139, we see this corrective mirror. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. The healing of narcissism requires not humiliation, but transformation. Where the false self collapses, in a safe way under grace. And the true self emerges in the security of God's gaze. Make your children feel good. Give them that admiration, even when they're not performing well. Let them know they're loved no matter what. Well, next time we're going to get into part 2, Unmasking the Systems of Power as a Defense Against Shame and Mechanics of Narcissistic Control. I hope you got something out of this today. If you did, please give us a like. That helps keep us motivated, and it also helps us on their algorithms and whatever else. So please subscribe and like. If you would like to get on my mailing list, go to our webpage, sign up for the newsletter. You'll also receive every day a daily devotional for free when you've signed up for the email newsletter. God bless. May your troubles be minor, blessings more, and happiness come through your door. See you next time.